Hello, this is a video for example 4 for Geometry Topic 1, Lesson 7. Theorem 1-4, all right angles are congruent. So, if we have two angles, if we have two right angles, they're congruent. What else do they have for us? If two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each has to be a right angle. So remember, supplementary means they add up to 180. If they're both equal and add up to 180, then they both must be 90, so therefore they're right angles. Okay? And I think there's a third one for us. Linear pairs theorem. If the sum of the measures of a linear pair, the sum of the measures of a linear pair is 180. So here we have angle 1 and angle 2. They form a linear pair, and no matter where I move the ray, those two always add up to 180, no matter what. Okay? Always add up to 180. Now let's see what they're going to have us do with this. All right, we're going to go back to proofs, which is what this section's about. Write a proof using a theorem. We're going to write a two-column proof. We're going to be given that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2, and the measure of angle 1 is 105. We have to eventually say that the measure of angle 3 is 75. Okay, let's see how they go about this two-column proof. They have 7 steps for this. You might say, 7 steps? I can do it in less than 7 steps. But you're probably missing one technical piece. Keep in mind how anal math people are, math teachers are. You need to have this before this and this before this, so bear with it. Given. I love when there's two given statements because then I can put them down as two different things, two different statements, okay? You don't have to do that. You could have had this written in one statement. You could have had both those given in statement 1 with the reason being given, but they did two different ones, okay? Then they went with, since the measure of angle 1 is 105, then the measure of angle 2 must be 105 because they are from the transitive property, because we already have, I should be looking up here, I should be looking down here. We have the measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 2, measure of angle 1 equals 105, and from transitive we can just say measure of angle 2 equals 105. Now, definition of a linear pair, because it forms a line, we can say angle 2 and angle 3 are a linear pair. And since they're a linear pair, the linear pairs theorem states that the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3 has to equal 180. Okay? Now look at what we have so far. From statement 3, we have measure of angle 2 is 105. We had they were a linear pair, so then we could say this. So looking at statements 3 and 5, I can see I have measure of angle 2 written twice. I think they're going to combine that in statement 6. Yep. Using substitution, they substituted the 105 in for the measure of angle 2, and they have 105 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180. You can probably predict what's going to happen next because we're trying to prove the measure of angle 3 is 75. So you would write now that the measure of angle 3 equals 75. Do you know the reason for that? It was subtraction because you subtracted 105 from both sides. Okay, now they're going to have you do one on your own. And this one, the book has 10 steps in their process. I'm going to just click. Actually, if you're interested in seeing how many, yeah, why not? See how many of those statements and reasons you can come up with. Click pause first. Do that, come back. All right? And now that you're back, I hope you tried it on your own. Like I did the other, in another example, I'm going to try to reason through it. We're given the measure of angle 4 is 35, and the measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 2. Oh, measure of angle 2 plus 4. They want us to prove the measure of angle 3 is 70. Well, I know the measure of angle 3 is the same as the measure of angle 1 because they're vertical angles. And they've told me the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 plus 4. They told me the measure of angle 4 is 35. So I can see how I have, but it's going to be kind of long-winded because measure of angle 4 being 35, you can say the measure of angle 2 is 35, but at some point we're going to, in order to move things around, we have to say things are equal, so we have to flip-flop back and forth between the transitive property and substituting and simplifying and the vertical angles theorem and yada yada yada. All right, I am going to go through their answer. And keep in mind there are different orders that you could do things. Like I noticed they didn't do all the givens in one step. They gave one given, and later on they're going to give the other given. They give us the measure of angle 4 is 35, that's given. And then they said the measure of angle, actually angle 4 is congruent to angle 2 from the vertical angles theorem. You might have thought you could say the measure of angle 4 is congruent to the measure of angle 2, but that's actually the definition of congruent angles. So this is where it can get frustrating, right? Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because they're vertical angles theorem. That doesn't mean the measures are the same until you state the measures are the same, because that's the definition of congruent angles. So you might have put steps 2 and 3 into one thing in your brain, but technically it's 2. Now that we know the measure of angle 4 is 35 and the measure of angle 4 is equal to the measure of angle 2, we can say the measure of angle 2 is 35. That's transitive property. It's not a substitution, it's a transitive property. Then they use the other given, which is the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 4. Oh, I went too far. I was wondering if you could guess what's next, but I already showed it. Since we know the measure of angle 2 is 35 and the measure of angle 4 is 35, they substituted those values in to get the measure of angle 1 equals 35 degrees plus 35 degrees. What do you think is next? I can see that I can add those two, so I think it's the additive property. Oh, they said, I thought it was going to be the addition property, but they did the simplify. I guess that's technically simplifying. The addition property would be if I added to the same side of the equal sign. Here, it's just simplifying. All right, now we got the measure of angle 1 is 70. What did we have to prove? That the measure of angle 3 is 70. Okay, we're pretty close. We have that the measure of angle 1 is 70. We have to say the measure of angle 3 is 70, but there's still 2 or 3 more steps, believe it or not. First, we can say that angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent from the vertical angles theorem. Then we can say the measures are the same for definition of congruent angles. And since the measures are the same, and we know the measure of angle 1 is 70, we can say the measure of angle 3 is equal to 70 degrees from the transitive property. Okay? Hopefully you're not too frustrated with proofs and all of the different particulars in it. The good news is a lot of this course will involve you applying what you know, not necessarily having to have the steps all lined up nice and neat and perfect. Is there another example? I think this is actually the last section in the last example in the section. So here's an overview of this whole section where they have an example of a 2-column proof, an example of a paragraph proof. It's important that you know the difference between each one. You don't want to always do 2-column proofs. You don't always want to do paragraph proofs. And the assignment for this last section is you can now do all of these problems: 9, 23, 24, 26, 11, 12, 19, and 20, and number 21. Thanks for listening. Have a nice day.